He was 12 years old and looked younger because hunger had narrowed his shoulders and softened his face, and his clothes hung on him like borrowed fabric from another life. The boy had come to the city with his mother years earlier after his father died in a factory accident, and since then life had been a quiet struggle that never seemed to end. They lived in a small rented room near the old railway tracks where trains passed day and night carrying people who always seemed to be going somewhere better. His mother cleaned houses when work was available, and the boy helped where he could by carrying groceries or sweeping shops for a few coins. School came and went depending on whether they could afford notebooks, and shoes and food came before dreams most days. Music entered his life by accident. One evening while waiting for his mother outside a building where she worked, he heard a piano through an open window. The sound stopped him where he stood because it felt like someone speaking directly to him without words. He did not know what a piano looked like then, but the sound stayed with him long after the window closed. From that day, he listened for music wherever he could find it. Sometimes it was a radio from a passing car, and sometimes it was a street performer with a worn keyboard powered by a tired battery. He listened closely and remembered everything because memory was free. Months later, he found a broken upright piano in a community hall that was rarely locked. Several keys were chipped and some notes were always out of tune, but it was still a piano. When the hall was empty, he pressed the keys slowly and carefully. At first it was noise, and then it became patterns, and then it became something that felt like home. No one taught him how to play. He learned by listening and trying again and again until his fingers understood what his ears already knew. When the hall was closed, he practiced on a table, imagining the keys and hearing the notes in his head. The boy never told anyone about the piano except his mother. She listened quietly as he explained how music made the heavy parts of the day feel lighter. She did not understand music, but she understood her son, and she encouraged him in the only way she could by saying that if something made his heart feel strong, then he should hold on to it. She also warned him to be careful and not draw attention where it might bring trouble. The world had not been kind to them, and she trusted it very little. Across the city stood a grand hotel that rose like a palace of light and marble. People dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses walked through its doors every day. The boy passed it often on his way to small errands, and each time he slowed his steps. Through the tall glass windows, he could see chandeliers glowing warmly and hear soft music drifting out when the doors opened. One afternoon, he heard a piano clearly from inside the lobby, and his heart began to race. The sound was rich and full and unlike anything he had ever heard. It was a grand piano, and even without seeing it, he knew it was different from the broken one in the hall. For days, he wrestled with the idea that slowly formed in his mind. He knew he did not belong in places like that hotel. He knew people would see his worn jacket and dusty shoes before they saw his face. Still, the pull of the music was stronger than fear. He did not want money or attention. He only wanted to touch the keys once and hear the sound from where it was born. He practiced harder than ever in the hall, as if preparing for a moment that might never come. On a quiet afternoon when his mother had found work nearby, the boy stood across the street from the hotel. His hands shook and his stomach tightened, but he crossed the road anyway. Each step felt heavy, as if the ground itself was asking him to turn back. Inside the lobby, the air smelled clean and warm and everything shone. People spoke in low voices and walked with purpose. In the center of the space stood the piano, black and polished like still water at night. A man in a fine suit sat near it, talking to others and laughing softly. The boy stood near the entrance, unsure of what to do next. He had planned to ask permission, but the words felt small in his mouth. A uniformed staff member noticed him and approached with a polite but guarded expression. The boy explained that he loved the piano and asked if he could play for a moment. His voice was calm, but his hands betrayed his nerves. The staff member hesitated and glanced toward the group near the piano. Among them was a wealthy man known in the city for his success and sharp opinions. He noticed the exchange and raised an eyebrow. The millionaire looked the boy up and down and smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. He made a light remark to those around him about children wandering into places they did not belong. Laughter followed softly. The boy felt his face grow warm, but he did not look away. He repeated his request more clearly this time and said he would only play briefly. The room seemed to pause as people waited to see what would happen next. For the boy, this moment felt larger than anything he had known. He was not thinking about judgment or pride. He was thinking about the nights he had practiced in silence and the music that lived inside him, asking for a voice. He stood still, holding that feeling as the adults around him decided whether he was worth a moment of their time. The answer would shape the next step of his life, whether he knew it or not. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the staff member looked again at the group near the piano, and then back at the boy, whose eyes stayed fixed on the instrument, as if it were the only solid thing in the room. The millionaire leaned back in his chair and waved a hand, casually signaling that the request was amusing rather than serious. He said that the piano was not a toy and that this was a respectable hotel, not a street corner. His voice was calm but carried authority, and several people nodded without thinking. The boy felt the weight of every stare pressing against his chest, yet he did not move away. Another guest, a woman with a gentle face, spoke softly and said that perhaps the child could be allowed a minute since the lobby was quiet. Her suggestion floated briefly in the air before fading as the millionaire shook his head and smiled again. He said talent required training and training required discipline, and discipline required the right background. He added that letting anyone sit at the piano would cheapen the place. The staff member shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to follow policy or compassion. The boy listened without interruption, and when the room fell quiet, he spoke again. He said he understood the concern and that he did not want to cause trouble. He said he loved music and practiced whenever he could, and that playing one song would mean more to him than they could imagine. His words were simple and steady and carried no anger, only hope. A few people exchanged looks, surprised by his composure. The millionaire laughed lightly and said that love alone did not create music worth hearing. He gestured toward the piano and said that if the boy believed he could impress them, then perhaps a test was in order. The tone was teasing, but the challenge was clear. The staff member looked relieved to have direction and nodded. He warned the boy that he could play one short piece and that if it caused disruption, he would have to leave immediately. The boy agreed without hesitation. As he walked toward the piano, the room seemed to stretch around him. The polished floor reflected his worn shoes, and the soft lighting highlighted every crease in his jacket. He reached the bench and hesitated for a moment, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingers. This piano was different from anything he had known. It felt alive and waiting. He sat down, carefully adjusting his position the way he had practiced in his mind countless times. The noise of the lobby faded as his hands hovered over the keys. He closed his eyes, not out of fear but out of familiarity. This was how he always began when the world felt too loud. He took a slow breath and let his fingers fall. The first notes rang out clear and deep, filling the space with a warmth that surprised even him. Conversations stopped and heads turned. The sound was confident and deliberate, not rushed or hesitant. He played a melody he had built over years of listening and imagining. It carried echoes of street music and distant radios and the broken piano in the hall. Each phrase flowed into the next with purpose. His fingers moved with a natural ease that could not be taught. The piano responded, fully resonating through the marble and glass, as if the building itself were listening. The millionaire leaned forward slightly, his smile fading as he focused on the sound. He had expected noise or mimicry, but what he heard was something else entirely. The boy played with control and emotion, shaping each note carefully. There was sadness in the lower register and hope rising in the higher notes. It was not perfect in a technical sense, but it was honest, and that honesty carried power. Guests stood quietly now, some with hands clasped and others with eyes closed. The woman who had spoken earlier felt tears gather unexpectedly. She could hear longing and resilience woven together. The staff member watched from a distance, forgetting his duties as the music filled the room. Time seemed to slow and stretch, allowing every note to settle fully before moving on. The boy was unaware of their reactions. He was back in the small hall at dusk, hearing the rain outside and feeling the bench beneath him. He was thinking of his mother waiting nearby and of all the days he had wondered whether music was meant to stay locked inside him. The piano felt like a bridge between who he was and who he might become. As the piece reached its quiet conclusion, he let the final chord fade naturally. His hands rested on the keys until the sound disappeared completely. The silence that followed was heavy and full. No one spoke for several breaths. Then a few people began to clap softly, unsure whether it was appropriate. The sound grew as others joined until the lobby echoed again, not with music but with recognition. The boy opened his eyes and stood quickly as if waking from a dream. He stepped back from the piano, unsure of what to do next. Applause was not something he had prepared for. He looked toward the staff member, who nodded with a mixture of relief and awe. The woman smiled openly now and wiped her eyes. The millionaire remained seated, his expression unreadable. He tapped his fingers lightly against his knee as if replaying the melody in his mind. When the clapping subsided, he stood and walked toward the boy. The room grew quiet once more. The boy felt his stomach tighten again, uncertain whether praise or dismissal awaited him. The millionaire stopped a short distance away and studied the child carefully. He asked where the boy had learned to play. The boy answered honestly and said he had taught himself by listening and practicing whenever he could. The millionaire raised an eyebrow and asked who paid for his lessons. The boy said no one did. He explained about the broken piano and the community hall and practicing on tables when he had to. A murmur spread through the room. The idea that such music could come from such circumstances unsettled many assumptions. The millionaire nodded slowly and said that raw talent was rare but direction mattered. He said the boy had potential, but potential alone could fade without guidance. His tone was measured, now stripped of mockery. He asked the boy what he wanted from music. The boy thought for a moment and then said he wanted to keep playing. He said music made him feel useful and strong, and that he wanted to learn more so he could give that feeling to others. His answer was simple but sincere. The millionaire glanced around the lobby and then back at the piano. He seemed to weigh something carefully. Finally, he said that he would like to hear more another day in a more formal setting. He instructed the staff member to take the boy's name and contact information. The boy hesitated and explained that he did not have a phone and that they lived nearby. The millionaire nodded and said arrangements could be made. As the boy stepped away from the piano, his legs felt unsteady. He thanked the staff member and the woman, who smiled at him again. He walked toward the exit, aware that the eyes on him were different now. Outside, the air felt cooler and the city sounds returned. He crossed the street slowly, his heart still racing. He found his mother waiting where she had promised. She saw his face and knew something important had happened. As they walked home together, he told her everything in a rush, from the challenge to the music to the applause. She listened quietly, holding his hand tightly. She did not celebrate or question. She simply said that whatever came next, they would face it together, and that she was proud of him in a way that filled the space between them with calm hope. The days that followed felt unreal to the boy, as if he were walking inside someone else's life, while still carrying his own on his back. The city looked the same, with its crowded streets and tired buildings, yet everything felt sharper and louder. He returned to the community hall and played the broken piano, but his hands trembled now, not from fear but from anticipation. The memory of the grand piano stayed with him like a warmth in his chest, and each time he touched the chipped keys, he imagined the deeper sound he had heard in the hotel. His mother watched him closely during those days. She noticed how he woke earlier and practiced longer, and how his thoughts often drifted away mid-sentence. She worried quietly, because hope had a way of making loss hurt more if it faded. Still, she said nothing to dim his excitement. She reminded him to finish his small chores and eat whatever food they had, and she told him that no matter what happened, he was still her son before he was anything else. 3 days later, a man from the hotel came to their neighborhood. He wore a simple jacket instead of a suit and walked carefully through the narrow street as if unsure where to step. Children stared and neighbors whispered. When he asked for the boy by name, the mother felt her breath catch. She invited him into their small room, apologizing for the lack of space. The man smiled politely and said he was there on behalf of the hotel guest who had heard the boy play. He explained that the millionaire wished to hear the boy again and had arranged for a private session in one of the hotel music rooms. He said there would be no audience and no pressure, only a chance to listen properly. The boy listened silently, his hands clenched together. His mother asked what was expected in return. The man said nothing at all except time. The session would take place the following evening and transportation would be arranged. That night the boy barely slept. He lay awake listening to the trains and imagining every possible outcome. He feared disappointing the man and feared even more that this chance might vanish after one meeting. He practiced in his head, replaying melodies and inventing new ones until morning light crept through the window. When he finally slept, it was shallow and brief. The next evening, a car arrived at the edge of the street, drawing curious looks. The boy changed into his cleanest clothes, which were still worn but carefully washed. His mother fixed his collar and smoothed his hair with her fingers. She kissed his forehead and whispered that he should play from the place that made him feel calm. She said no one could take that away from him. The car ride felt long and quiet. At the hotel, they were led through a side entrance into a smaller room lined with wooden panels and soft lighting. A piano stood in the center, less grand than the one in the lobby, but still beautiful. The millionaire was already there, standing near the window with his back turned. When he heard them enter, he turned and nodded in greeting. His expression was serious now, without the earlier amusement. He asked the boy to sit and play whatever he wished. There were no jokes or challenges this time. The boy sat and took a breath and began. The room filled with music again, but this time it was gentler, more deliberate. He explored quieter spaces, letting pauses exist without fear. The millionaire listened without interruption, his eyes closed at times and his posture relaxed. When the boy finished, the man thanked him and asked him to play another piece. Then another. After the third piece, he asked questions about how the boy practiced and what music he liked and what he felt while playing. The boy answered honestly, saying he liked anything that told a story and that he felt most alive when his hands matched what he felt inside. The millionaire nodded, as if these answers confirmed something he had already suspected. He then spoke about discipline and opportunity and how talent could be shaped or lost depending on guidance. He said he had funded many programs and scholarships, but rarely had he encountered raw instinct without formal influence. He told the boy that he was willing to sponsor piano lessons with a respected teacher and cover transportation and materials. He said this was not charity but an investment in something rare. The room felt suddenly too small. The boy looked at his mother, who sat quietly near the wall. Her eyes shone with pride and worry mixed together. She asked what the arrangement would require and whether there were expectations beyond practice. The millionaire said only commitment and honesty. He said the boy would remain free to choose his path, but guidance would open doors. The boy felt overwhelmed. The idea of lessons and structure excited him but also frightened him. Music had always been private and instinctive. The thought of rules and correction made him uneasy. The millionaire seemed to sense this and said that learning did not erase feeling but sharpened it. He said the boy would still be himself, only more capable of expressing what he already had. After a long pause, the boy agreed. His voice was steady though his heart raced. The millionaire smiled for the first time without reserve. He stood and shook the boy's hand, firmly treating him as an equal rather than a curiosity. Arrangements were discussed and dates set. The mother thanked the man quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Lessons began the following week. The teacher was an older woman with sharp ears and kind eyes. She did not flatter or scold. She listened carefully and corrected, gently explaining why certain movements mattered. At first the boy struggled with posture and technique. His fingers wanted to move freely, but now they had to follow structure. He grew frustrated more than once, but the teacher reminded him that control would give his emotion greater reach. Days became full. Mornings held chores and afternoons held practice and travel across the city. Evenings brought exhaustion and reflection. The boy felt stretched thin yet alive. His mother adjusted their routine and neighbors noticed his absences. Some doubted and others encouraged. The boy learned to ignore both, focusing on the keys beneath his hands. Weeks passed and his playing changed. It grew clearer, stronger, more intentional. The melodies he once imagined now carried weight and direction. He began to understand music as a language with rules that could be bent but not ignored. The teacher smiled more often now and challenged him with harder pieces. The millionaire attended one session quietly from the back, saying nothing until the end when he simply nodded. Despite progress, the boy felt tension building inside him. He feared becoming someone else, shaped by expectations. One evening he told his mother that he worried the music might stop feeling like home. She listened and said that homes change as people grow, but they remain places of return. She said he should never play to please one person but to stay honest with himself. Her words settled him. A small private recital was arranged weeks later for a handful of guests. The boy learned of it only days before. Fear returned, sharp and familiar. This would not be a quiet lobby moment but a planned event. The millionaire said it was time for others to hear what he had been building. The boy nodded though his stomach churned. On the night of the recital, he sat at the piano feeling the familiar mix of nerves and calm. As he played, he remembered the broken piano and the first sound that had stopped him in the street. He let that memory guide him. The music filled the room and held it steady. When he finished, the silence felt respectful, not stunned. The applause was warm and genuine. The boy stood and bowed awkwardly. The millionaire approached and spoke softly, saying this was only the beginning. The boy did not fully understand what that meant yet, but he felt something shift inside him. The world was opening slowly and carefully, and he was stepping forward one note at a time. The attention that followed the small recital did not explode into sudden fame or dramatic change, but it shifted the rhythm of the boy's life in ways he could feel every day. People began to recognize his name in quiet circles connected to music and education. Invitations came slowly and carefully, always framed as opportunities rather than demands. The millionaire remained present but not controlling, and he allowed the teacher to guide the next steps with patience. The boy sensed that this phase was about foundation, not display. School became more regular again because arrangements were made to support his attendance. Teachers noticed his focus and discipline even when he was tired from long practice sessions. Music did not distract him from learning but sharpened his attention. He began to see patterns in numbers and language the same way he saw them in melodies. His confidence grew quietly, not as pride, but as certainty that effort mattered. At home, life remained simple. The room near the tracks did not change and meals were still modest. His mother continued her work and refused offers of relocation, saying stability mattered more than comfort. The boy understood this and felt grateful that his life had not been swept away too quickly. The piano lessons were demanding, and some days he returned home frustrated by mistakes that would not leave him alone. On those nights, his mother listened and reminded him that growth was rarely comfortable. As months passed, the teacher introduced him to classical pieces that required discipline and patience. At first he resisted because they felt distant from the music he loved. Over time, he began to appreciate their structure and the way emotion could live inside precision. He learned that control did not silence feeling but allowed it to travel further. His hands grew stronger and his posture more relaxed. He practiced scales with the same care he once gave melodies. The millionaire observed these changes quietly. He invited the boy to occasional dinners with musicians and educators not to impress, but to expose him to different paths. The boy listened more than he spoke, absorbing stories of struggle and persistence. He learned that talent was common, but endurance was rare. These evenings left him thoughtful rather than dazzled. One afternoon, after a long lesson, the teacher asked the boy to play something of his own again. He hesitated because it had been some time since he had created freely. When he began, the notes felt uncertain at first, but then they found their place. The melody carried new depth shaped by what he had learned. The teacher smiled and said that this was the balance they had been building toward. The boy felt relief and joy mixed together. Soon after that moment, the millionaire proposed something unexpected. He suggested entering the boy into a regional youth music evaluation, not a competition, but an assessment that could open doors to advanced programs. The idea frightened the boy because it involved judges and formal settings. He worried that labels and scores might trap his music inside expectations. His mother encouraged him to consider it, saying that doors did not force anyone to walk through them. Preparation for the evaluation became intense. The teacher structured practice carefully, balancing technique and expression. The boy learned how to manage nerves and focus under observation. Some days he failed to meet his own standards and left lessons angry at himself. The teacher allowed these moments to pass without harsh words, reminding him that frustration was a sign of care. The day of the evaluation arrived quietly. The building was modest and filled with young musicians and anxious families. The boy noticed how different his background was from many others, yet he did not feel smaller. He felt grounded by the journey he had already taken. When his turn came, he walked to the piano calmly and adjusted the bench with practiced ease. He played the selected pieces with attention and honesty. There were moments where nerves brushed the edges of his focus, but he stayed present. He remembered his mother's words about home and played from that place. When he finished, he bowed and left the room without waiting for reaction. Weeks passed before the results arrived. Life continued as usual, and the boy tried not to think about outcomes. When the letter came, the teacher opened it first and smiled before handing it to him. The evaluation panel had recognized exceptional promise and recommended him for a scholarship pathway at a respected academy. The news felt heavy and bright at the same time. The millionaire reacted with satisfaction but not surprise. He said the result confirmed what was already clear, but also warned that the academy would demand more than talent. The boy listened quietly, feeling the weight of choice settle in his chest. Attending the academy would mean travel and time away and greater pressure. It would also mean growth beyond what he could imagine. His mother asked for time to think. That evening they sat together, listening to the trains pass. The boy admitted his fears about losing the simplicity of his connection to music. His mother said simplicity was not the same as smallness, and that he had already learned to carry himself through change. She said she trusted him to know when something no longer felt right. The decision was made slowly and deliberately. He would attend the academy on a trial basis with the understanding that he could step back if needed. The millionaire supported this condition and ensured arrangements were flexible. The teacher prepared him carefully, reminding him that new environments required patience and humility. The first weeks at the academy were challenging. The pace was fast and expectations high. Some students had years of formal training and moved with confidence. The boy felt behind in some areas but ahead in others. He struggled with comparison, but returned often to the feeling that had first drawn him to music. He practiced early and late and listened closely. One evening after a long day, he found an empty practice room and played freely without structure or goal. The music flowed easily, reminding him of where he began. He realized then that growth had not erased his core but expanded it. The fear that had followed him softened. The millionaire visited occasionally, offering encouragement without pressure. He reminded the boy that success was not measured by applause but by integrity. The boy carried those words with him quietly. As the season changed and leaves fell, the boy felt stronger, not just as a musician, but as a person. He had learned to navigate new spaces without losing himself. He still returned to the community hall when he could and played the broken piano, smiling at its familiar flaws. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but he no longer feared uncertainty. He had learned that doors could open slowly and that walking through them required patience and honesty. Music remained his anchor, steady and true, guiding him forward one note at a time. The academy routine settled into the boy's life slowly and demanded more from him with each passing week. Yet it also gave him a sense of direction that felt grounding rather than overwhelming. He learned to wake before sunrise to practice when the halls were quiet and the piano rooms were empty. In those early hours, he felt closest to himself because no one was listening and no standards were hovering over his shoulders. Music returned to being a private conversation and not a performance. As time passed, instructors began to notice him not as the boy with an unusual background, but as a student with a distinct voice. Some praised his emotional sensitivity, while others pushed him harder, pointing out technical gaps that needed discipline. At first, he took criticism personally and carried it home like a weight. He worried that mistakes meant he did not belong. Slowly, he learned that correction was not rejection, and that being challenged meant being taken seriously. The pressure increased when the academy announced an internal showcase that would determine which students would be considered for advanced mentorships. This was not a public event, but it carried consequences that felt heavy. The boy felt his chest tighten when he read the notice. He remembered the hotel lobby and the first moment of judgment, and the fear returned quietly. This time it was not strangers doubting him, but the possibility of disappointing those who believed in him. He spoke to his teacher from the academy about his fears, and she listened carefully. She told him that fear often appeared when something mattered deeply, and that it could sharpen focus if handled with care. She advised him to choose a piece that represented his journey rather than one that showed technical perfection. Her words reminded him of his first teacher and the balance they had worked toward. At home, his mother noticed the tension immediately. He spoke less and practiced more and sometimes stared at nothing for long moments. One evening, she asked him to sit with her and talk. He admitted that he felt torn between proving himself and staying true to the music that had carried him this far. She told him that proving himself was something the world demanded, but staying true was something he owed himself. She said both could exist together if he listened carefully. The day of the showcase arrived with quiet seriousness. The hall was familiar, but felt different, filled with expectation. Other students warmed up with fast runs and confident movements. The boy moved more slowly, focusing on breathing and grounding himself. When his turn came, he walked to the piano, feeling the weight of the room settle around him. He began with control, letting the opening notes establish calm. As the piece unfolded, he allowed memory to guide him. He thought of the broken piano and the community hall and the long nights of listening. He let those feelings shape the music without forcing them. There were moments when his hands shook slightly, but he stayed present and did not retreat. The final notes faded naturally, and he sat still for a brief moment before standing. The response was quiet but attentive. Instructors nodded to one another and made notes. The boy did not search for faces or reactions. He walked off the stage feeling lighter than he expected. Whatever the outcome, he knew he had played honestly, and that knowledge settled him. Results were announced days later. The boy was selected for mentorship with a visiting pianist known for both discipline and emotional depth. The news brought excitement and a new wave of pressure. The mentor was respected and demanding, and known for pushing students beyond comfort. The boy felt both honored and afraid. Their first meeting was brief and direct. The mentor listened to him play and then asked him to explain why he chose each phrase. The questions were probing and required reflection rather than technique. The boy answered as best he could, sometimes unsure. The mentor said little at the end, only that understanding intention mattered as much as execution. Mentorship sessions became intense. The mentor challenged him to strip pieces down to their core and rebuild them with purpose. At times, the boy felt exposed, as if every habit was being examined. There were sessions where frustration spilled over and he left feeling inadequate. On those days, he returned to the early morning practice and played freely, reminding himself of why he began. The millionaire remained present but distant, respecting the process. He asked occasional questions and listened without directing. One afternoon, he invited the boy for a walk through a quiet park near the academy. He spoke about his own childhood and the expectations placed on him early in life. He admitted that success often came with pressure to perform rather than to feel. He said he supported the boy not to shape him into a symbol, but to protect the honesty he had witnessed. This conversation stayed with the boy. He realized that others carried unseen struggles regardless of status. It softened his view of the world and of judgment. He began to see mentors not as gatekeepers, but as people offering tools. As months passed, the boy grew more confident in navigating critique. He learned when to absorb feedback and when to trust his instinct. Performances no longer felt like tests but conversations. He still felt nerves, but they no longer controlled him. A letter arrived one evening from the academy administration inviting him to perform at a small charity event hosted at the same hotel where his journey had shifted. The connection felt symbolic and heavy. He sat quietly holding the letter, unsure how to feel. Memories rushed back of the lobby and the scoff and the first notes that changed everything. His mother read the letter and smiled softly. She asked how he felt about returning. He admitted that part of him wanted to avoid it and part of him wanted to face it fully. She told him that returning did not mean reliving the past but honoring how far he had come. She said he did not owe the place anything, but he might owe himself the chance to stand there without fear. He accepted the invitation with care. Preparation took on a different tone this time. He was not trying to prove worth or earn approval. He was preparing to speak through music with clarity. The mentor encouraged him to choose a piece that reflected growth rather than triumph. On the night of the event, he walked into the hotel through the same doors, but everything felt different. He carried himself with quiet assurance. The piano waited in the same place, polished and calm. Guests gathered without knowing the full story. When he sat down, he felt grounded rather than small. As he played, he noticed the room soften around him. He was not watching reactions, but he felt connection in the air. The music flowed with confidence shaped by experience and resilience. When he finished, the applause was warm, but what mattered more was the stillness he felt inside. After the performance, the millionaire approached and thanked him not as a benefactor, but as someone who had witnessed growth. He said the boy had become exactly what he hoped to support, not a prodigy, but a person with direction. The boy thanked him quietly, understanding the weight of those words. As the night ended and he stepped back into the city air, he felt a sense of continuity. The journey was ongoing with no final destination yet in sight. He knew challenges would continue and expectations would rise. Still, he felt prepared, not because he had answers, but because he had learned how to listen. Music remained his constant companion, steady and honest. It no longer felt like an escape, but a way of standing fully present in the world. He walked home with his mother feeling tired and fulfilled, aware that the path ahead would demand more, but confident that he could meet it with the same sincerity that had carried him from the very beginning. The months after the hotel performance marked a quieter phase in the boy's journey. Yet it was one of the most demanding he had faced so far, because growth no longer came from sudden moments, but from consistency and inner discipline. Expectations around him increased even when no one spoke them aloud. Teachers assumed more awareness, mentors assumed deeper intention, and audiences assumed excellence. The boy felt these assumptions pressing gently but steadily against his daily practice. He learned quickly that talent once discovered was never left alone. People wanted progress in stories and outcomes. He felt the pull of being shaped into something impressive rather than something true. To protect himself, he built routines that grounded him. Early morning practice returned as his sanctuary. He played slowly, sometimes painfully slow, listening to every sound and feeling every movement. These sessions reminded him that music was not meant to rush toward approval. At the academy, he was given more responsibility. Younger students watched him and asked questions. Some looked at him with admiration and others with quiet envy. The boy treated them all kindly because he remembered what it felt like to stand outside looking in. He shared advice only when asked and spoke honestly about struggle. This honesty made him respected in a way that surprised him. One afternoon, his mentor asked him to stop playing mid-phrase and asked what he was avoiding. The question startled him. He tried to answer, but words failed. The mentor said that sometimes musicians hide inside technique when emotion feels risky. He asked the boy to sit quietly for several minutes before touching the keys again. The silence felt uncomfortable at first, then revealing. When the boy played again, the sound was rawer and less polished, but more alive. The mentor nodded and said that courage often sounded like imperfection. That lesson stayed with him. He began to notice when fear guided his hands rather than intention. He learned to pause and breathe and choose honesty even when it felt exposed. Performances became fewer but deeper. He was invited to play at small gatherings where music mattered more than reputation. These spaces felt closer to the community hall of his childhood. At home, his mother noticed a change, not in success but in presence. He listened more carefully and spoke with thought. He asked her questions about her life before he was born and about the dreams she once held. She shared stories of choices made and paths left behind. These conversations deepened their bond and reminded him that sacrifice and love shaped many lives quietly. The millionaire remained a figure in the background, now less involved but still attentive. He invited the boy to lunch once and asked how he defined success. The boy thought carefully and said success felt like alignment between effort and meaning. The man smiled and said that answer took him decades to reach. He said the boy should guard that understanding because the world would try to replace it with numbers and applause. As the year progressed, the Academy nominated the boy for an international youth music exchange. The opportunity involved travel and exposure to different traditions and teachers. It also meant time away from home and unfamiliar environments. The boy felt excitement mixed with hesitation. He discussed it with his mother, who encouraged him to go but reminded him to stay anchored. She said roots were not chains, and that distance often revealed what mattered most. Preparation for travel brought new challenges. Language barriers, cultural differences, and unfamiliar expectations awaited him. The academy provided guidance, but uncertainty remained. On the night before departure, he returned to the community hall alone. The broken piano was still there, quieter than before. He played softly, not to practice but to remember. The sound was imperfect but full. He thanked the space silently for holding him when nothing else could. The exchange program was demanding and enriching. He met young musicians from many backgrounds, each carrying their own story of struggle and privilege. Some were technically brilliant but emotionally guarded. Others were expressive but lacked discipline. The boy found himself somewhere in between. He listened carefully and learned from each interaction. Workshops were intense and honest. Teachers spoke openly about failure and resilience. One instructor said that music revealed who a person was more than what they could do. That sentence echoed inside him. He felt affirmed in his journey and challenged to go further inward rather than outward. During one session, he was asked to perform a piece from his own background. He chose a melody inspired by the city sounds of his childhood. As he played, he felt his body relax and his heart open. The audience responded quietly and respectfully. Several students approached him afterward asking about his story. He shared it without embellishment. The simplicity resonated. Traveling away from home also brought loneliness. Nights in unfamiliar rooms felt long. He missed his mother and the familiar rhythm of trains passing. During these moments, he learned to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. He wrote in a small notebook, reflecting on what music meant to him now. His thoughts grew clearer and more grounded. When he returned home months later, the city felt both familiar and new. He noticed details he had once ignored. The streets felt louder and more alive. He returned to the academy with renewed focus and humility. Teachers noticed the shift immediately. His playing carried depth, shaped by experience rather than ambition. A public concert was scheduled at the academy featuring selected students. This time the boy did not feel fear. He felt responsibility. He understood that people would listen not just for skill but for truth. He chose a program that reflected growth and vulnerability. During rehearsal, he made mistakes and accepted them calmly. The mentor smiled, seeing the change. On the night of the concert, the hall was full. His mother sat quietly in the back. The millionaire attended without announcement. When the boy walked on stage, he felt present and grounded. He played with openness, allowing emotion to guide technique rather than hide behind it. The music moved naturally and honestly. When the final note faded, the applause was strong, but what mattered more was the stillness he felt afterward. He bowed and left the stage without rush. Backstage, he found his mother waiting. She hugged him tightly and said nothing. No words were needed. Later, the mentor spoke to him privately and said that the boy had crossed an important threshold. He said that many musicians chase excellence, but few allow themselves to be seen. He said that visibility carried risk, but also power. The boy listened quietly, understanding the weight of that truth. As the season ended and new opportunities appeared, the boy no longer felt rushed to reach them. He understood that his path would unfold in its own time. Music was no longer a question of arrival, but of presence. He had learned to listen deeply to sound, to silence, and to himself. The journey that began with a simple request to play had grown into something steady and expansive. He remained the same boy, shaped by hardship and curiosity, but he carried himself with clarity and purpose. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he would meet it with honesty, patience, and an open heart, guided always by the quiet strength of music. The years that followed did not rush forward with dramatic turns, but unfolded steadily, shaping the boy into a young man who understood both patience and responsibility. Music was no longer a surprise in his life, but a commitment that required daily attention and humility. He balanced his studies at the academy with performances and mentorship duties, and learned how easily energy could be drained when purpose was forgotten. To protect himself, he returned often to silence, letting quiet moments reset his intention. As his reputation grew, invitations arrived from outside the academy. Small concert halls, community events, and educational programs asked him to play or speak about his journey. At first, he accepted everything out of gratitude, but soon he felt the strain. His mentor noticed the fatigue and advised him to choose carefully. He was reminded that saying yes to everything often meant saying no to depth. Learning this was difficult but necessary. One invitation stood apart from the others. A community music program in a district much like the one he grew up in asked him to visit and work with children who had little access to formal training. The request stirred something deep inside him. He remembered standing outside places where music felt distant and unreachable. He agreed without hesitation. The first visit was emotional in ways he did not expect. The building was modest and the instruments worn. The children were curious, guarded, and hopeful all at once. When he played for them, the room filled with attention that felt pure and unfiltered. Afterward, they asked questions about practice and talent, and whether someone like them could really learn. He answered honestly, saying that curiosity mattered more than comfort, and that listening was the first lesson. He returned often to the program, finding meaning that performances alone could not offer. Teaching forced him to articulate what he had learned intuitively. It also reminded him that access and encouragement changed lives quietly. His mother attended some sessions, watching with quiet pride as he guided others with patience. At the academy, his final evaluations approached, bringing a different kind of pressure. Decisions about future paths loomed, including advanced conservatories, teaching fellowships, or performance-focused careers. Advisors offered opinions but did not push. The boy, now a young man, listened carefully and reflected deeply. He understood that every path carried trade-offs and that choosing one meant releasing others. The millionaire requested a meeting during this time. They sat together in a simple room away from attention. The man spoke openly about age and legacy and the desire to support things that lasted beyond wealth. He asked the young man what kind of life he wanted, not as a musician but as a person. The question stayed with him long after the meeting ended. He realized that music had given him voice, but service gave it direction. He did not want to exist only on stages, removed from the lives that shaped him. He also did not want to abandon the discipline and excellence he had worked for. The challenge was not choosing one identity but integrating many. He made a decision that surprised some. He applied for a combined path that allowed continued performance while committing significant time to education and outreach. The academy supported the choice, recognizing his unique balance of skill and purpose. The mentor approved quietly, saying that alignment mattered more than prestige. Graduation arrived without spectacle. The ceremony was formal but restrained. As he walked across the stage, he felt gratitude more than triumph. His mother watched with tears in her eyes, remembering the small room by the tracks and the nights of uncertainty. The millionaire attended, sitting among others without distinction. After graduation, life became fuller and more complex. Travel increased and schedules tightened. He learned how to manage fatigue and expectations. Some performances were inspiring and others routine. Through it all, he returned often to the community program, expanding its reach with careful planning. He used his growing network to secure instruments and support, always insisting that dignity mattered more than charity. One evening, after a long day, he returned alone to the hotel where everything had shifted years earlier. The lobby looked the same yet felt distant. The piano remained polished and waiting. With permission, he sat and played quietly. There was no audience and no judgment. The music flowed gently, filled with memory and gratitude. When he finished, he sat in silence, understanding how far the journey had carried him. He stepped back into the city air, feeling grounded. He knew the future would bring new challenges and moments of doubt. Still, he trusted the foundation built through struggle, honesty, and care. Music had opened a door, but integrity had guided him through it. The boy who once asked for a chance had grown into someone who created chances for others. He did not measure success by applause or recognition, but by the quiet moments when music connected lives. His story continued not as a single arc, but as a series of choices made with awareness and heart, always listening, always learning, and always returning to the sound that first called him forward. The final stage of his journey did not arrive as an ending, but as a deep settling into who he had become and what he was meant to offer the world. By this time, he was no longer introduced as the boy from the hotel or the child prodigy with a dramatic past. He was known simply as a musician and an educator, someone who carried both skill and sincerity into every space he entered. This quiet shift mattered more to him than recognition, because it meant the story had grown beyond its beginning. His days were full yet balanced. Mornings often began with teaching young students whose hands trembled the way his once had. He guided them patiently, focusing not only on notes, but on listening and posture and confidence. He told them that music was not about impressing others, but about understanding themselves. Some of those children reminded him of his own early years, and he treated them with the same respect he once wished for. Afternoons were often reserved for his own practice and composition. He no longer practiced to prove anything but to stay connected. Some days the music came easily, and other days it resisted him. On those days, he welcomed the struggle because it reminded him that growth never truly ended. He wrote pieces inspired by everyday sounds and quiet moments and fragments of memory that returned unexpectedly. Evenings brought performances or meetings or long conversations with collaborators who shared his values. He chose projects carefully, turning down opportunities that felt empty even if they promised visibility. This discipline protected his energy and kept his work meaningful. People around him noticed his calm presence and sought his counsel not just about music but about balance and purpose. His relationship with his mother remained central. Though time had changed their lives, they still shared meals and long talks whenever schedules allowed. She moved into a more comfortable home but kept her routines simple. She reminded him often that success did not require forgetting where one came from. He listened and honored that truth in his choices. The millionaire aged quietly and stepped back from public life. Their connection remained respectful and warm. They met occasionally, sharing reflections rather than plans. One afternoon, the man told him that the greatest return on his investment had not been recognition, but witnessing integrity grow stronger with opportunity. The musician thanked him and understood that support, when given without control, could change lives. Years passed, and the community program expanded into a network supported by local leaders and artists. It became a place where children felt safe to explore creativity without pressure. The musician refused to attach his name to it in large letters, insisting that the space belonged to the community itself. He believed that music should empower rather than elevate individuals above others. One day, a young boy approached him after a workshop wearing worn clothes and carrying quiet hope in his eyes. He asked if he could play the piano even though he had never touched one before. The musician smiled gently and said yes, of course, and guided him to the bench. As the child pressed the keys awkwardly, the sound was uneven yet full of wonder. The moment felt familiar and deeply moving. Watching that child, he understood something fully for the first time. His journey had not been about escaping hardship or proving worth, but about transforming access into continuity. Music had been the bridge, and now he was helping build it for others. This realization brought a sense of peace that no applause ever had. Late one evening, he returned again to the community hall, where the broken piano still stood, though it had been repaired enough to sing clearly. He sat alone and played softly, letting the room hold him as it once had. The notes carried gratitude and memory and quiet joy. He did not feel the need to rush or perform. He simply listened to the sound and let it exist. As he finished, he rested his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. He thought of the boy he had been standing in a hotel lobby, unsure of his place. He felt compassion for that child and pride in the patience that had carried him forward. He understood that the journey had shaped him not through single moments, but through sustained honesty. He left the hall and walked into the night air, feeling complete without feeling finished. The path ahead would continue to unfold with new challenges and responsibilities. Still, he trusted himself to meet them with the same openness that had guided him from the beginning. The story that began with a simple request to play had grown into a life dedicated to listening, teaching, and creating with care. There was no grand conclusion, because meaning did not require one. The music continued flowing through rooms and lives, carried by quiet hands and open hearts, and that was enough. Quiet hands and open hearts, and that was enough.